I see.
Then the change in direction towards Mecca. Obviously, Tom Holland went through this in his book, The Shadow of the Sword. And I think when you look at the archaeological records in Mecca, you don't see anything there. You know, they're not finding anything. But Islam says it's the oldest city on earth.
I'm not sure Islam does actually say it's the oldest city on earth.
I thought that Adam was there, wasn't he? Didn't Adam make...
It's a tradition that exists amongst Muslims, but it's not mentioned in the Quran. The Quran mentions Abraham and his son Ishmael building, but there's no mention of Adam, although it's possible. But in terms of Dan Gibson's theory, if you look at the coordinates that Dan Gibson provides for these mosques, they don't actually face towards Petra. And if you look at because what Gibson is doing is he's taking satellite pictures.
No, I thought he went and visited them on the ground. He actually went and visited the places. And I think he was refuted by, was it King? Dr. King.
Yeah, that's
but
right.
Then another person came along, I can't remember his name, so you have to forgive me, and he was like, well, and King didn't visit the site because Gibson was in the Middle East for like 20, 25 years, whereas King he's old, he's sort of 80 something, isn't he? And then there was a third guy who came along and said, well, actually, he slightly favoured Dan Gibson.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, that was my understanding. And listen, I don't think that disproves Islam, but I think it's happening is, along with
one of the problems with Crone doesn't actually subscribe to her views that she originally expressed in Hagerism.
Yeah, she slightly changed it.
She co-authored it with Michael Cook, and Michael Cook as well doesn't also subscribe, because they were new academics, and at the time they said they were experimenting.
Yeah, she was just throwing out theory, wasn't she? But she still stands by some of it, and definitely the trade routes, the Meccan trade routes. There weren't any, were there? And Mecca doesn't exist on any historical maps.
Well, there's Tommy. Have you heard of Tommy? He's a Christian. He's a Christian writer. So he has a Mecca. He has a map of Mecca from either the 2nd or 3rd centuries.
My understanding didn't exist on any maps at all.
There's a map of Tommy.
I'll have to look up that. But there's certainly not trade routes were there.
That I haven't looked into.
Stop being aggressive. Stop being aggressive and spitting on his brother.
And in a sense, you're being very nasty, when you look at where Mecca is, it's in the middle of the desert. There wouldn't be any reason to go down there, unless there was a large population. And we know that the water there isn't to look after a big population. You've only got the Nazam well, which is from pictures I've never been there, but it's like a kind of, you have to go down with a bucket. I mean, it's not going to give anybody kind of a right.
But you know the other issue, the problem.
And you apologise for doing it. And you apologise.
Is it okay if we just so you know that the issue is, like, you know, in early Islam, you had different groups or different ideologies competing against one another, and like the Khawarij and the Sunnis and Shias. But all of them agree about Mecca as being like the central point of Islam. But there's no tradition amongst them about Petra. So there's no hadith.
We would probably say, I think what some scholars are saying is that it got rewritten and wiped out and destroyed that evidence of Petra.
So each of those groups hated one another, and each of them, they have their own history as to with regards to who should be the successor to the Prophet. But all of them at least agree upon the text of the Quran, as well as the general outline of Islam, such as the Mecca and the Medina period.
There's also Muhammad's enemies referred to as growers of olives and grain in the Quran, and olives don't exist in Mecca.
I think that it's in reference to maybe Jerusalem.
Oh, is it? Okay, but Muhammad was never in Jerusalem, was he?
Well, in the Quran it speaks of the journey.
But the Jerusalem wasn't built until, who was the person who did it? Abdul Malik, wasn't it?
Yeah, so linguistically the word mosque or masjid, the Arabic word, means a place of prostration. It doesn't necessarily refer to a physical
building. Okay.
So just like the word church.
Church means a congregation of people.
I think the Greek word is ecclesi. I forgot what the Greek word is, but something like that. But it refers to like a group. So the word masjid means like a place of prostration. So in the Quran it mentions the furthest masjid. And this is interpreted as being reference to the Prophet's night journey to Jerusalem.
I'm wrong, but there weren't any Muslims in Jerusalem at that point, were there?
Again, it goes back to what the word Muslim means, like in the linguistic sense. It means that someone who submits their will to God. So the Quran says that Abraham was neither Jew nor Christian, but he was Muslim. So, and what that means is that Abraham was a submitter to God's will. Obviously, they didn't speak Arabic, but they spoke some kind of Semitic or Semite language. But
they are Semites.
So Abraham from that region. But the concept itself of submitting themselves to God existed. So,
but what about
Jesus says, "Not my will, but your will be done."
Yeah, sure.
Like in the Gospels.
Yeah, sure. But what about the whole sort of farming agricultural bit about the lack? Because that's going back to Patricia Crone as well, isn't it? The dates and the olives and the enemies of Muhammad. They refer to these farmers, but Mecca there's no farming there. It's completely dry. It's in the desert. You can't grow olives there. So that points to me, in my mind, I think that gives weight to that Petra theory that's where Muhammad was.
But there's no like actual tradition or hadith that makes mention of Petra.
No, sure, the hadith doesn't, but it does talk about Muhammad's enemies being these growers.
In the hadith?
I think in the Quran, no?
I don't know which
I'll have to go and check that.
Sorry.
Okay. Go and check that. But that's what I thought Patricia Crone's work was originally founded on, that she was looking at.
It's just that you would expect it to be some kind of tradition from early Islam. Not necessarily from Sunnis, but even like from Shias or from Khawarij or Mu'tazilis that would have like a tradition about Islam being in Petra. And also,
Well, I'll have to go away and look at the sort of agricultural side of things.
Also, look at the peer reviews as well of Tom Holland's work, and also of Hagarism as well. Of Hagarism. That was the book which Tom Holland is based upon. And there's also Neil Robinson discovering the Quran. He's a professor of Islamic studies from Leeds University. Neil Robinson. I think he's retired now. But he wrote a book in the 90s called Discovering the Quran, and in it he makes mention of Tomeli, an early Christian who had a map of Mecca, and he has a chapter in which he reviews Hagarism as well.
Okay, well I'll take a look. Another thing also, just about the northern one, and this is Tom Holland's work, is he says that there is a reference to Lot's pillar in the Quran, isn't there? Lot's pillar? Lot's wife. Lot's wife. You remember she got
turning into
a salt pillar.
Okay.
And that pillar is in Israel, so it's next to the Dead Sea where they think Sodom and Gomorrah was. And the reason they know that that's Sodom and Gomorrah is because there's all that sulfur there, the brimstone that came down when God came down and judged it for its immoral actions. And there's a pillar that overlooks. And the Quran, I believe, says that you will see it every day as you pass by, and it's a reference to you to be reminded. So that's also another theory that Tom Holland said. That
is this like a verse in the Quran?
About Lot's pillar. Let me just see if Lot's wife, I can't remember Lot's wife in the Quran. Let's have a look.
Because the other thing about, like, I don't know if you ever visited a mosque, like there's the Central London Mosque. So just looking from the outside, you wouldn't be able to know which direction they pray. It's only when you go inside, you can see. It's known as a mihrab. Which tells you the direction of prayer. But just simply from a satellite image, you wouldn't be able to tell or know.
Oh, this is back to Dan Gibson. But my understanding is that he lived there in the Middle East for like 20, 30 years, and actually went and visited all these sites. And that's what got him. I mean, I would have thought it would be quite easy to work out where the Qibla is, because you get a compass out and you go, there it is, and okay, that's,
well, Muslims even
2 degrees that
today,
way.
what's interesting about these mosques, they don't actually all align or agree with one another.
Yeah.
So like they have like different directions, which means that people made mistakes. They thought they were facing towards the Qibla, but like human beings being humans, they're not infallible. So even today, Muslims make mistakes.
I do get that, but it just seems
they
like
get the direction wrong.
There is a sort of early period where it was one way, and then it seems to change to a later period being another way. And I think that...
But none of these mosques agree like that they're all facing in the same direction in some other different way. It just more seems like they're all like made a mistake with regards to the direction of prayer.
Yeah.
Whereas if there was this early tradition of Petra, then they would all align towards Petra.
Okay.
That's at least in my understanding.
Yeah, so my understanding was that they did originally align to, very early ones did all appear to align towards Petra, and then there was a bit of a sort of sway between either Mecca or Petra while the two warring factions were happening, and then they all turned down towards Mecca.
Well, check out the book by Neil Robertson, Discovering the Quran. In it, he's got, like, I believe, a chapter on this kind of direction of prayer of these early mosques, and he's an academic, professor of Islamic studies. But yeah, to ask you, so as a Christian, do you believe in the Trinity, or?
Yeah, I do. I think I'm forced to believe that, even though I don't understand it.
So, But most biblical scholars say that the historical Jesus never believed that he was God. That he.
I don't think I agree with that. No, I'd say most biblical scholars say that they're Christian, or they do the work and then they become Christian. There's only one person who I can think of who isn't. Is what's that fella called?
Bart Ehrman.
Bart Ehrman. Thank you. Yeah, he's one of the exceptions where he thinks that Jesus thought he was a prophet, and he really believed that the second coming was just about to happen.
Well, I mean, there's scholars like Christopher Tuckett, James D.G. Dunn, I believe Father Raymond Brown. He's not a Protestant but Catholic. E.P. Sanders.
What I would say, if you've read F.F. Bruce's work, are the Gospels reliable?
Yes.
He was a Christian, obviously.
That's right.
My understanding is, again, we'd have to go away and I'd have to go away and we'd just get a list of stuff, wouldn't we? But my understanding is a lot of these biblical scholars are Christians as well, because they look at the weight of evidence and they say, yes, these are written within the lifetime of eyewitnesses.
That's not what F.F. Bruce says. So F.F. Bruce says the first of the 4 Gospels to be written was Mark, which was written in the early 60s. And then he says Luke was probably written like maybe mid-60s or before 70. And then Matthew and John. John, he dates that in the 90s.
Yeah, that's right.
And Matthew, I think he dates that like maybe 75.
Yeah, I agree with that. But John was still an eyewitness because he lived a long time, didn't he? He lived into his 90s. So that would mean if it was written
John
in the 90s...
doesn't claim to be an eyewitness, but he claims to be based upon an eyewitness report. But the author himself differentiates himself from the eyewitness or from the disciple. Okay.
My understanding was that John was an eyewitness. Mark was not an eyewitness, but it was written by someone who was Mark's follower, and he describes himself in the Bible as the man who runs away naked. The young man running away naked when they come to get him in God.
That's from church tradition. But even in church...
He also sort of scholars, isn't it? He doesn't name himself, does he? Because he knows he's going to get in trouble if he names himself. So I did it, because they were still looking for them at that stage in time to haul up the Christians and execute them and do whatever.
Well, if you look at F.F. Bruce, he says that Matthew, he incorporates about 90 to 95% of Mark's Gospel in his own. So if Matthew was an eyewitness, it wouldn't make sense for Matthew to copy a non-eyewitness when writing his own Gospel, because if he was an eyewitness, then he would write from first person and speak as though he was present at the events himself. but and not copy like from another eyewitness. And everyone agrees that Mark wasn't an eyewitness.
Wasn't an eyewitness. Yeah, Mark is. Yeah.
Sorry, he wasn't an eyewitness, but he was Peter's secretary. So he was like Peter's interpreter.
So if you'd seen it, I would then be right, because Peter was a fisherman, wasn't he? So he probably did it right. And so Mark was probably writing down, because he came from a wealthy family, because they also think that they met within Mark's family's house for the Last Supper. And so he would have been an educated guy. And I think that's pretty strong evidence, you know, they're so close in time to the actual events that we can
But
have
you know, in Mark, no one worships Jesus in Mark's gospel, but in Matthew's gospel, which is based upon Mark, he changes the story so that people worship Jesus. There does appear.
What about when he's in the boat? Don't they say?
Yeah.
Don't they worship him in that when he?
In Matthew, they worship him. Yeah.
Is it not Mark? Is it?
No. So it's in Mark chapter 6.
Yeah.
Jesus walks on water and he gets into the boat. I've got the Bible on me, so.
Yeah.
It's Mark chapter 6. Okay, so the walking on the water, specifically. Okay, so I guess verse 51 and 52. Jesus gets into the boat, and the disciples. The storm dies, and the disciples do not understand the miracle of the loaves due to the hearts being hardened. But in Matthew chapter, I believe it's 14.
Yeah. Okay. Then they worship him. There we are.
Did you find it? Matthew. So it's like verse number 32. After they got into the boat, meaning Jesus. They worship him, saying, "Truly, you are the Son of God."
But what he says here, he says, "Take courage, it is I," and I also means I am. It's the same word in Greek, I and I am.
That's right.
So he could be claiming divinity status there by saying I am.
No more than, like, for example, Paul does. You know, in 1 Corinthians chapter 15, when Paul says, "By God's grace, I am that I am."
It all depends on the context, doesn't it? When you say I am.
So the context of this is that when Jesus walks on water, Jesus is telling them, "Do not be afraid, because it is I."
Yeah, but I would say as a Christian, what he really says is Jesus. I am. Not it's Jesus, it says I am God.
But nowhere in the Bible does it say that God's name is I am.
It does in Exodus. When he comes to Moses and he says, "Go to the people of Israel," and they have this conversation, and he says, "What should I tell them? Who sent me?" And he said, "What is your name?" It says, "I am, I am." That is, and then when Jesus says it to the Sanhedrin, when he's on trial, as you know, he says the I am statement, and they tear their priestly robes, which were robes from God and ordained.
Yeah.
You don't do that lightly, you know. It would be like
again,
if you tore
within
up
the
Quran,
context,
you were so cross, that's the seriousness of it. And boom, and then they say blasphemy. We don't need to hear anymore. You are dead, sunshine.
Well, I mean, within the context of the story of the burning of the bush, when Moses asked God his name, God says to him, "I am that I am." That doesn't sound like God telling Moses his name is I am. It just more sounds like, "Never mind what my name is."
Well, that could be one interpretation, but
Karen Armstrong gives that interpretation.
Well, Karen Armstrong.
She says it's like a Hebrew idiomatic expression to mean like none of your business, or never mind what my name is.
I mean, I don't know. Karen Armstrong isn't a Christian, though, is she? She's an atheist.
She was a nun, a Catholic nun for some time.
Well, there you go.
And she studied under Michael Golder, I believe.
Okay. I don't know who this dude is, but he sounds important.
I think he was maybe a colleague of F.F. Bruce.
Okay. But I would say now she's writing her book, and she's non-Christian.
Sure.
So she's going to always have that non-Christian slant.
No one's 100% neutral. So no one's
of course, you come with your prejudices, I come with mine, and we go from there. But I would say that the Sanhedrin definitely thought the I am statement was blasphemous.
But if you read E.P. Sanders, I know you've not heard of him. He's a Presbyterian, and he's written like a what has now become like a standard reference book like for the historical Jesus studies.
One of the Jesus seminar.
I mean, he's not from the Jesus seminar,
No.
but
Because they're pretty wacky.
Yeah,
You know, if you started quoting them, I'd probably think.
Actually, have you heard of N.T. Wright?
N.T. Wright.
Bishop N.T. Wright.
Yeah, again,
So he studied under E.P. Sanders. He was a student of E.P. Sanders.
Oh, maybe that's where he's gone wrong.
So that's how big E.P. Sanders is. But anyway.
But N.T. Wright, he believes in the ordination of women, so he's against the Bible.
But he argues for the resurrection of Jesus.
Yeah, he probably does.
You know, he wrote that book, The Resurrection of Jesus, or something like this.
Yeah.
The Resurrection of Son of God.
Sanders.
Yeah, E.P. Sanders, yeah, with an S at the end.
Yeah, this fella here. Right, I'll take a look.
So he's written a book called The Historical Figure of Jesus.
Yeah.
And in that book he says, basically, if you look at the response of the high priest, there's nothing in the reaction itself that tantamounts to any form of religious blasphemy or Jesus breaking any Jewish law. So if Jesus, because they just
said it's blasphemy.
Well, just because they said it's blasphemy doesn't necessarily mean it was. It's like they accuse him of breaking the Sabbath. But just because they accuse Jesus of breaking the Sabbath doesn't necessarily mean it's factual. It doesn't mean that Jesus did actually break the Sabbath.
But they were the law. I mean, that's a bit like, in an example, if you're in a court and the judge says to you, you killed somebody, you're sentenced, you know, that's just saying, oh, that doesn't mean I'm guilty, you know, just because the judge said. I mean, they were the law. The only thing they couldn't do in the land was execute somebody, because that power was given to the Romans. They didn't have that power.
But Jesus' like disagreement with the Jews was often to do with the interpretation of the Mosaic law. So often Jesus was butting heads with them with regards to the interpretation of the law. So they accuse him of religious blasphemy, but Jesus says there was nothing that he said that tantamounted to religious blasphemy. At the court of Pilate, I believe.
Absolutely. So when he said the I am statement, he says, I'm telling the truth, I am God. So that's not blasphemy.
But they were asking him, are you the Christ? And he says, I am.
Yeah.
So Christ just means God's anointed one, or his servant.
King, Christos.
Yeah, it can mean king as well.
Yeah.
So like in the Old Testament, David and Solomon are referred to as God's Messiah, I believe. And Cyrus, the Babylonian king, in Isaiah chapter 45 verse 1, is referred to as Messiah. Or
as a Messiah?
Yeah.
Is he? Yeah. Do you have it there?
Yeah, it's in Isaiah chapter 45 verse 1.
Yeah, I haven't seen this, so I'd have to go away and have a look at it.
Thus says the Lord to his anointed, Cyrus. So in the Hebrew it's Meshach.
Yeah.
It's easy to remember.
Yeah, let me take a photo.
So you know Cyrus was the Babylonian
and he sent them home. And so,
he helped them during the exile.
Yeah, and you can see his cylinder in the British Library.
Oh yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Oh, British Museum, sorry.
Yeah, I think I've seen it. Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. So.
But so Jesus says he's God's anointed, and the anointed is not the anointed. So let's have a look at the
passage in Mark.
Yeah, I think it's Mark 16.
Yeah, sure.
Sorry, it's chapter 14, yeah. I think it's chapter 14, verse 62. But you know what's interesting about this is that they bring false evidence against Jesus and false witnesses to testify. But why would they have to bring false evidence? Where if Jesus did claim to be God during his ministry?
Yeah, that was before, wasn't it? So they were trying to trap him, and he wasn't talking, and they sent him off to Herod, didn't they? And then he didn't send him to Herod because he thought Herod was a clown. So he came back, and he said, "Right, enough of this. Here I am, bang, I'm God."
But it does seem like a false trial, because they're bringing false witnesses. And
Absolutely, yeah.
So even when they accuse him, it's verse number.
You can't just order to put him to death, but they found many gave false witness against him, but their testimony did not agree. Some took the stand and testified against him. We heard him say, "I will destroy this." Sorry. "Are you the Messiah, the Son of the Blessed One?" Then Jesus answered,
Is that right?
"I am.
Cool, thank you.
I am. And you will see the Son of Man seated at the right hand of the power and coming with the clouds of heaven." As you know, that's a prophecy from Daniel.
That's right.
This is a prophecy of God's anointed one coming. And
So people like Bart Ehrman
Yeah.
and also I believe E.P. Sanders, they would
Okay.
say, here Jesus is speaking about the Son of Man as someone else to come after him. So Jesus is predicting or prophesizing the coming of the Son of Man.
Yeah.
But sometimes when Jesus speaks about the Son of Man, it's as if it's someone else or another to come in the future.
Sure, but why then did the high priest tear his garments? What further need have we of witnesses? You've heard the blasphemy. What do you think? They all condemned him, deserving to die.
Yeah.
And you died if you called yourself God. So I think that the Sanhedrin clearly didn't understand that interpretation. They understood that Jesus was claiming divinity.
I would say they misconstrue what Jesus says.
Yeah, but surely then Jesus would just say, "Look, I'm about to go to the cross. I don't want to go to the cross and die if I'm an innocent man," which he wasn't an innocent man anyway, as we know. But he would then say, "Stop, stop, stop, you've misunderstood me." But he doesn't. He then goes on, doesn't he?
Well, if you look in John chapter 8, verse 40, Jesus says about the Jews, "You are determined to kill me, a man who spoke the truth which I heard from God."
So you're determined.
You who are seeking or determined to kill me, a man who spoke the truth which you heard from God.
This is in
John chapter
Oh, well,
8.
I'm not going to look at John. I just want to concentrate on Mark. Sorry, because otherwise we jump too much. And I think John's a very different form of gospel from Mark.
Yeah, what's interesting about John, John is the most like high Christology.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah.
But even in John, it's recognized that Jesus was a man whom the Jews were seeking to kill because he spoke the truth which he heard from God.
Yeah.
But in Mark's gospel, you know when Jesus heals the man with a withered hand, and
So
he.
stretch out your hand and it's healed. Yeah,
That's
I know.
right, and because he like undermined their authority at the temple, because he was trying to teach that you could actually save a life even when it's the Sabbath, but they were saying no, like that amounts to working on the Sabbath.
Yeah, sure.
But Jesus disagreed with them, and so because he undermined them, it says in Mark chapter 3 that they had a secret meeting about him, and there they begin to conspire as to sentence or put him to death.
Yeah, I think that's right, and I think the Jewish, he was cross because people, the Gentiles and other non-Jews were being denied entry by the money changers. They were being ripped off. When he overturned the money tables, that's what he was cross about. That in the court of the Gentiles, they had to exchange money for their sacrifices. He was just against their whole system, wasn't he?
That's right. So it wasn't to do with anything that he claimed at that point, but even before he makes any claims, they already have made up their mind
I
about
agree.
killing
I
him.
could see that. Yeah, they wanted to kill him because he was setting the established order, and they were making money off it. And
Precisely, yeah.
and he didn't like it. But
Into a house of thieves.
later, and originally in his ministry, he's like, "Don't tell anybody." When in Mark he heals the man,
The blind man.
Yeah, he says, "Don't tell anybody," and then the person goes off and tells everybody.
Yeah,
he's
true.
like, sorry, just going back to John. Even though I said we wouldn't go to John, when he turns the water into wine, he says to his mother, "My time has not yet come. Leave me, leave me for the moment." And so he's, rather like in the Old Testament when Israel had been brought out of on the Exodus out of Egypt. They're gradually learning for themselves about God's nature. So when they cross over the Red Sea, God says, "Don't do anything, just stand there. I'm going to save you by grace alone." Not because you're good, you're just as much a sinner as the Egyptians. Then they cross across. And then slowly they had those battles and they've got to hold up Moses' hand, and then if they don't, the other side starts winning, like coming out some Midianites maybe or something. And gradually he's teaching them what he wants. And that's what Jesus' mission journey is there, gradually move forward.
Well, if Jesus did claim to be God, like from the burning bush, God straight away, like from the beginning, says, "I am God." Whereas if God knew that sometime in the future that he was ever going to become a man, then he wouldn't have given him that law in the first place. That if any one of you from amongst you, claims to be God or starts teaching you to worship another God other than the God that brought you out of the land. I'm paraphrasing. Then God wouldn't have given him those commandments or those laws, because if God is going to become a man, and he's going to tell them that I'm God, then what is the first thing that they should do is that they should, sentence him to death or put him to death.
Sure.
It makes more sense that Jesus was a prophet sent by God. And the Jews, like the prophets that were sent to them previously, they tried to stone them or sentence them to...
Yeah, but against that, we also see in the Bible there's a prediction about Jesus' coming, isn't it? Where it says the Son is born, he'll be called Mighty Counselor, God, and I think it's Micah 5 is there.
Yeah, in Isaiah.
Yeah, and there are these
9,
images of what's going to come along. And I think, especially,
But what's interesting, he's called the Everlasting Father. But in the New Testament, Jesus is never called Everlasting Father. Instead, he's presented as being your brother in a metaphorical sense. So he says, like, whoever does the will of God, he is my brother, sister, and mother. Or whoever does the will of God. So Jesus is never called Mighty God, and he's never called Prince of Peace or Everlasting Father, but actually the opposite.
But those are divine titles, I'd say, and
which are never given to Jesus in the New Testament.
Which are never given to Jesus in the New Testament. Okay, I mean,
to my knowledge, the only one I can think of, I guess the closest, is Wonderful Counselor or Advocate. So in the New Testament, Jesus is referred to as an advocate or counselor, in which he says, I will pray to the Father and he will send you another helper or another advocate.
Sure.
But he's
I
definitely...
always refer also to Deuteronomy, where it says, Hear, O Israel, your Lord gods are one. And the Hebrew for God is Elohim, and that's a plural word. And the Jews have a specific word for one, which isn't the word used there. The word used there is echad, which can mean one, but it can mean compound one. So one team, and it's the same word that's given with when a husband and wife become one flesh, they go together. And so that, and there is a specific Jewish word for singular one, and they don't use it there, and that's actually a problem for the Jews. Because later teaching the Jews under Maimonides started to teach this complete singularity oneness of God. Do you have to go?
No, it's fine, Dorian.
Whereas originally they were much more fluid and sort of understood about.
If you look at the context of that commandment when it's given, it always uses the singular pronouns in reference to God. So when it says, in Deuteronomy chapter 6 verse 4, when it says, Hear, O Israel, the Lord, our God, the Lord is one, and his commandments or his statutes you should obey or keep. I'm paraphrasing, but basically the pronouns are always in the singular. It's not they or them. And also when it's translated into Greek in the New Testament, there the Greek word there is haste. And haste is the cardinal number for one, or numerically one. And even Ehad...
I haven't looked at the Greek, I just looked at the Hebrew, and I know Elohim is plural for gods. So really it should be translated as
Elohim
gods.
is not there in Deuteronomy chapter 6
Sorry?
verse 4. The word Elohim is not in Deuteronomy 6.
No, I'll have to look at the Torah. We won't find it in there.
Elohim is the plural for Elo, and Elohim is the plural of that. But there, it's basically Shema Israel, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. But Elohim is in Genesis chapter 1 verse 1. In the beginning, Elohim created it. But every English translation, including Trinitarians, they all translate that as in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth. No one ever translates it as in the beginning gods created the heavens and the earth, even though in the Hebrew it's plural.
Well, I would say within that in Deuteronomy, you've got a grouping of gods by other people. So the context surrounding it is about grouping of gods. Because back then, a lot of people had multiple gods when we agreed that. So that context would fit with the plural version of God coming in there, and that because they were talking about these.
But it's actually the exact opposite, because there are these kind of foreign nations that had many gods. But the point being is, for Israel, they are to have one God.
One God.
Not like many gods.
Absolutely. We think God the Father and God the Holy Spirit and Jesus are one God.
Well, look up Mark chapter 12, verse 29.
Yeah.
There Jesus quotes that first commandment about the Lord. Yeah, sorry, yeah. So Jesus says the most important commandment is, the greatest commandment. Jesus says, "Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God is Lord alone, and you should love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind." And he says this is the greatest commandment. And you should love the neighbor as yourself. And there are no other greater commandments than these. So if you look in an interliner in the Greek, if you look up the word one or the Lord alone, there the Greek word there is haste.
Okay.
H-E-I-S-T.
And what's the Hebrew word?
The Hebrew word is ihad.
Yeah. Which can be plural one, can't it?
But it's translated in Greek as being a cardinal number, as being one.
Yeah.
And even with ehad, if you look in a dictionary, a Hebrew dictionary, ehad is like the first word that comes up for one, as being a cardinal number.
Yeah, but it's not. The Jews have a different word for pure singularity, and it's not used there.
What is that?
I don't know what that word is. Apologies, but
Well,
it is a different word for one, which just means total ones.
Well, with the ehad, it also depends on the context as well.
Context,
so the meaning can be plural, like you said, like when a man leaves his parents and then becomes one flesh.
One flesh with his
but there is from the context is determined.
Yeah.
But from this commandment about the Lord our God is one, there the context is just one, as in like God is alone.
Well, that's how you view it. I view it differently, don't I? You know?
But also just to quickly go back to Mark chapter 12 verse 29, there the word says haste, but when you go to John chapter 10 verse 30, when Jesus says I and the Father are one, there's a different word known as hen. Okay. And hen can mean like one as in a compound unity, but it's not used here in Mark chapter 12.
And that's Greek, is it?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
So hen is one. It can be like in a unity compound, whereas haste is just one person, single. So you know in 1 Corinthians chapter 8, verse 6, when Paul says, although there's many lords and many gods, but unto us there's one God, the Father, and unto us there's one Lord, Jesus Christ, or Christ Jesus. So there the word one, unto us there's one God, the Father, is haste.
Okay.
So meaning the Father's,
I'm not so familiar with
Father's one person, and unto us there's one Lord, Jesus Christ. So Jesus is one person. Yeah. Jesus is not like a compound.
Yeah, I know.
Of many.
So listen, just back to historicity, because that's where we were originally. I mean, and back to Mecca. Why do you not think they've found any archaeological evidence of historical trade routes or civilization of Mecca? You know, when you go to Rome, you see the Colosseum, you see like loads of stuff. Even in Britain, where like if I dig up one of my if you go into the countryside and they put a new road in, they always do an archaeological report, and they find all sorts of stuff when they're driving it through. Now the Saudis are building, and they've got the archaeologists waiting, but they've found nothing.
I need to go back to that book written by Neil Robinson called The Discovering the Quran. I believe he addresses these points about the trade routes, and there may be some documentary evidence for these types of trade
because
routes.
If Abraham was there with, you would say Ishmael, we would say Isaac. But let's leave that for one time. That would mean that it had probably been there for 4,000 or 5,000 years or something, wouldn't it? You know, there would be a long historical record of activity.
But for most things like from that long ago, we hardly have any kind of like documentary type evidence.
No, I'm not talking about documents. I'm saying like physical items. They would have thrown out pottery. They would have thrown out all sorts of garbage. You know, humans, we always leave garbage bins. So you can go to societies and see how the society develops from either wealthy or going to poorness or vice versa by looking through the garbage there, and you see, they were eating really well here, or they were getting poor, and we don't put any of that in Mecca at all. So that's why, just going back to that bit about Petra, I think things push northwards for Muhammad being a more northerly prophet.
Well, I mean, that's the thing that I'm unsure about, but I could also reference, there's a video on YouTube. It's by Mansoor Ahmed.
Okay.
If you type Mansoor Ahmed and Petra, there he's done like a video on this subject. So, he actually had a debate, like a mini debate with someone called Jay Smith.
Oh, I know. Yeah, he was here, wasn't he?
That's right. So him and Jay has spoken on this subject. So if you type like Mansoor Ahmed, I think it's something like maybe Dan Gibson or Petra or something.
All right, I'll take a look.
You'll find stuff. Something.
And what do you also say about the coinage? Because, Muhammad didn't appear on the coins for 80 years or something. That's the first reference of his name on an Islamic coin.
So
on the coins.
For 80 years, did you say?
80 years after his death.
I believe since the first century. Yeah, I was going to say.
And then he and this is Tom Holland's point, that actually Abdul Malik wanted to call himself the Blessed One, and that's why it appears on the Dome of the Rock in the inscription there.
There is a reference to a Christian making reference to the Prophet within 2.5 years after his death. I forgot the name of the Christian, but it's an article on the Islamic Awareness website. Have you heard of Islamic Awareness?
I might have, yeah.
So I can find the article for you. Maybe.
Okay.
Sorry.
No, I do think there are texts that exist. I think there is a Christian that mentioned about Muhammad.
Okay.
But I think actually the text was written after Muhammad's death. So, it kind of slightly contradicts the Islamic story.
It's still within 2
years, 2-3 years. Yeah, that's the one. I know it. Yeah, I've definitely heard of that as well. Actually, that's another point. What do you think to the Birmingham manuscript? Because that's carbon dated, isn't it? And you take the average, and it's kind of it's not an Uthmanic copy, is it?
No, it falls within that period. So it may even be earlier than Uthman. So it may even go back to the lifetime of the Prophet as well. Because carbon dating, it gives you like a range. Where it's the tradition that determines if you want the exact date.
Yeah, that's right. So it could actually be before Muhammad, couldn't it? And I've seen articles written that it's earlier than Muhammad's time, which would be kind of pretty disastrous.
The only one who says that, as far as I know, is Jay Smith.
Oh, is it? Okay.
But
I was just looking at the range, because I think it's 570, isn't it? To 645, isn't it? That carbon dating?
Something like that, So the material could have been produced before the time of the Prophet, and then used either during the time of the Prophet or later on. And also back then, material was limited, so they would recycle or reuse the same material.
Yeah, you would reuse the same thing. Give a false time, couldn't it? Yeah. Manuscript date. Let's have a look.
Have you seen the Birmingham manuscript?
No, I haven't actually. Have you?
No, I would like to.
Yeah. Date. 568 to 645. So I suppose somewhere around about
you were right.
700 something.
So that would be the radiant. It would be like a range date.
Yeah.
And then
the average. But I suppose you could. Certain people have argued that the Quran is earlier than Muhammad.
The only one I can think of is just Jay Smith, unless if you know someone else. I think Tom Holland gets his information, some of it, from Jay Smith.
I don't think he gets it from Jay Smith. I think he gets it more from like Sister Crone and all those sort of people.
Well, she passed away.
Yeah, she did. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Sadly, from I think cancer.
She was 70 something. Yeah. Anyway,
but she did believe that the Quran like she gave an interview on a Open Democracy website, and she said that the Quran, all of it, or if not all of it, then most of it, was recited by the Prophet Muhammad.
Okay. Yeah. Well, I mean, I haven't seen that bit, but
she gave that interview like 10 years ago. It's on the Open Democracy website.
She did receive a few death threats, so that might have played into
she?
her mind. Yeah, of
Okay.
course. Yeah, a lot of people in Islam weren't happy about that. You know. Going back to the sort of Trinity sort of side of things. You know, what do you think to when God said, "Let us make man in our image"? What do you think He's referring to then as the plural of "our"? You know, Christians would say, "Oh, well, that's a reference to the Trinity."
Have you come across the NIV Study Bible? So if you look at the NIV Study Bible for Genesis, they say this doesn't necessarily mean the Trinity.
No, it doesn't mean the Trinity, but it does refer to a plural sense, doesn't it?
Yeah, so there's different ways of understanding it. I mean, my own personal take is that it's a majestic plural, whereas Jews, they may interpret it as being reference to God's angels. So God is addressing or speaking to the angels and using the plural.
Someone said that to me. I still think that angels, we don't know. The Bible doesn't say what the image of angels are. So if that's correct, then angels would look like us by default, wouldn't they?
Oh, okay.
I'll come back inshallah.
All right, inshallah.
Yeah. So I would say that view, I think, is.
But even that verse about God making man in His image is something that's controversial. Well, not controversial, but like there's different views as to what that means. So
Christians would say this, and you guys would say that.
Well, even Jews, because I think what Jews say is, and I think Muslims would agree, is that it means that God's given man like the ability to reason, like rationale.
Yeah.
So when it says that God made man in His image, God gave him the ability, the faculty of being able to reason.
Yeah.
Such as to be able to tell something contradictory.
Okay. Yeah, it's not my understanding of how I would use the word "are," but everyone in this day seems to use words in different ways.
Because in the Bible, it says that there's nothing like God. Like there's nothing like God in the heavens or upon the earth. I am God, besides me there's no other, or I am God, there's none like unto me.
Sure, yeah.
So you can't take that literally, that when it says that God made man in His own image, it doesn't literally mean that God has an image that you can copy or carbon from. It could be some kind of figure of speech or expression.
It could be. I mean, we won't know, will we, until we're dead.
I mean, ultimately, then we will know.
Then we'll know, exactly, I think these things are...
But the
it
Bible
also
does
just
have a lot of metaphors or figures of speech.
Oh, it does, absolutely. Look, I mean, I think that's the challenge, isn't it? And Christianity is all about exploring, whereas I think Islam is more about, here it is, don't ask questions,
No, I mean, actually, you should speak to Adnan, because Adnan, I think he's met Tom Holland.
Yeah.
And he actually has some Islamic coins as well. He specializes in that field.
Oh, right,
and I think he may even have a coin of